How did you like come up with the idea of doing a bunch of things in lawsuits? And I'm assuming like your background is within law.
Yeah, I'm an attorney.
Yeah, I figured as much.
Yeah. So when you get to that question, basically, I stumbled upon it, truly.
Yeah.
And, just ran with it after that.
Always find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from at the lowest price, it's easy to find your favorite Cabernet or a new single-barrel bourbon to try with some help from one of their friendly guides. And with every bottle comes the confidence of knowing you just found something amazing. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, find what you love and love what you find only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly and be 21. Ed Bly and Rising Tide Spirits are back again with a new release of Old Stubborn Bourbon. And this release of Old Stubborn is a premium hand marriage of 10, 11, and 12-year cask strength, barely filtered pot still bourbon. It comes in at a staggering 123.8 proof. And the flavoring grain for this one, which the last one was wheated, but this time it's now rye. Rich, sweet, and bold with a long finish that's sure to be another eye-opener. You can order online at Sealbox or thebourbonconcierge.com, and you can even purchase in person at Revival Vintage Spirits, and even now with very few select stores in Kentucky. You can get it now while you can, but be sure to do it because it's not going to last long. From their bar to yours, Chad and Sarah of the popular YouTube channel It's Bourbon Night bring you their favorite at-home old-fashioned mix with the new Elemental Elixirs Golden Hour Syrup. It's a custom-made syrup with notes of bold black tea, warm spices, and orange zest. All you need is your favorite whiskey and ice. No bitters needed. One bottle makes 16 drinks, so that's only $1 a cocktail before you add your own whiskey. They can also be enjoyed in other cocktails or spirits, mocktails, coffee, tea, and anything you can think of. It's crafted locally in Lexington, Kentucky, and you can get your bottle now at whiskeyambitions.com. Do you ever pour yourself a bourbon, swirl it around, and then start struggling to come up with tasting notes? And perhaps you're also looking for a good Father's Day gift idea. Well, you can now solve both with a kit from Knows Your Bourbon. And unlike other nosing kits on the market, Knows Your Bourbon kits feature real ingredients for the most authentic aromas. You can smell real Tahitian vanilla bean instead of some synthetic aroma that's just made from chemicals. So head on over to knowsyourbourbon.com and enter code BP10 for 10% off your order.
Play Whiskey Wednesday Round 11, the memory game. Until June 26, each week you can win one of our 12 incredible grand prizes. Select $2 at checkout. And if they match on drawing night, you'll win that bottle. Not a match? No worries. You still score a Weller 12-year. Every $5 ticket gives you 5 chances to win, including 4 weekly bonus prizes. Get your tickets now at give270.org. Charitable Gaming License ORG 0002703.
Bringing to you the best stories from icons in the bourbon industry, it's Bourbon Pursuit. Now here are your hosts, Ryan and Kenny.
Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. My name is Kenny, and usually I have Ryan here with me, but today Ryan is not going to be able to make it. As everybody kind of knows, he had his twins born just a few weeks ago. So he is in and out of the NICU, taking care of that, taking care of his wife. Most of us, we've all been there before, so we know the trials and tribulations that go into having a newborn and the kind of time that's going to be taking. So don't be surprised if I'm just going to be doing it solo for a little while coming up. But, this is really kind of cool. This past week, I sent out a tweet because I went to the liquor store and I said, I'm just going to get a bottle of bourbon for the office because a few guys have bottles and I'm always chiefing off of them. And I was like, well, I need to just go get a bottle for the office. And so I sent out a tweet and a picture and I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and get this and I'm going to crack this open. And I actually bought a bottle of the Old Granddad bottled in bond. So it's 100 proof bourbon. And I got it because it was only $16. And I figured at that price, people were, if they were drinking it, it's not going to kill me. So, and surprisingly, I was very, very impressed with it for a $16 bottle of bourbon. And I had a $75 bottle of bourbon that night. And I don't think it really compared to it. So if you've got a particular office bourbon, you want to share yours, just go ahead and hit us up on Twitter. We'll definitely retweet you and hopefully get you some more followers there as well. But today, let's go ahead and introduce our guests and get this rolling. So today we have Brian Haara of the acclaimed Sipp'n Corn blog. So today, let's welcome Brian to the show. Brian, how's it going?
Great, Kenny. Thanks for having me.
So do you have a particular office bourbon that you use?
Well, right now I've got a Four Roses single barrel, but I've also got 3 unopened that I'm waiting. I'm trying to schedule a tasting with some clients, a blind tasting, and take them through that. But the open one right now is Four Roses single barrel.
I'd say I wish I could be one of your clients, but you're an attorney. I don't know if I want to be one of your clients.
Well, that's the thing about attorneys. You like to know us, but you don't want to know us too well.
Exactly. So I guess let's talk about your history and your past, right? Before we get into the blog and some of that stuff, like give us your bourbon story.
Well, my bourbon story, and at least as far as getting into the blog goes, I was researching a totally different issue. I don't even remember now what the issue was, but I came across a case from the late 1800s involving LeBrow and Graham, James Pepper, and it's the old Oscar Pepper distillery story. And I had been on the Woodford tour. I had seen the limestone buildings and all those sorts of things, heard what they said about Oscar Pepper. But here it was all in the case, and it wasn't exactly what the tour guides tell you. And particularly James Pepper really fascinated me. And after reading that case, I poked around and found that distillers back in the 1800s loved to sue each other. E.H. Taylor, Colonel Taylor, was suing Stagg back and forth, and he was suing Marion Taylor, who's known very well in Louisville. And they're all suing each other basically, and
it's a continuous cycle, right?
It's a continuous cycle. And then I'd obviously heard in current times, we've more recent times anyhow. We've got the Red Wax case, and a lot of people know about that. We know about the KDA and Sazerac not necessarily getting along. We know that there's been a Woodford Reserve and Barton 1792 case. So it's something that continues to happen. And in a lot of ways, it's come full circle and has really fascinated me. So I decided that would be the launching point for my blog.
Oh, great. So that's great for your blog, I guess. How did you get in? Is that kind of the entrance into the bourbon world as well? Or have you just, I know you're here in Louisville and Kentucky. So, did you just grow up around here and just always have a knack for bourbon, or kind of just how'd that kind of roll in?
Well, I didn't grow up here, and my first memory of bourbon is sort of the cheap Jim Beam white label in Coke, and I remember shivering. I still remember shivering. And then when you had money, Makers was the bourbon that you would buy, and it stayed that way for a long, long time. But it's definitely a progression where you move from the college bourbon. And then you start drinking it on ice, and then you start drinking it neat, and you start really appreciating the flavors and the character of the different bourbon, and you just become infatuated with it. It's such a rich drink, and then you learn about the history of it, and it makes it all better.
Well, that's awesome. So I guess the one good thing that I really love about your blog, and I always anticipate getting those tweets that come out and you have something really cool, is that I think the really awesome facet of your blog is that, we talk about the history and how the bourbon history in itself has so much to do with the way that people really look at it and how they admire it. And I think what you really bring is such an interesting angle to how everybody gets a look into the past. So today we can go and we look on the shelves and we see 7 different versions of the word Taylor out there, and we see all these different things. But there's a huge history of why all those things come from different places. The origins of why all that happened as well. So I guess you kind of started. You said you kind of stumbled upon this. Now do you sit back there and you start going through archives of Lexis Nexis or something like that to go and search for the words of E.H. Taylor or something like that?
Absolutely. After a few months into this and writing the first few posts, I realized that there really was a rich history of lawsuits there. And I can find them. You can find them online through free searches, and you can find them through paid searches. But you just start searching for bourbon or distiller, and you can find all of these cases. The origin story of Ezra Brooks was one that I really found interesting, because you see on the bottles now of Ezra Brooks that they talk about having all sorts of history. They talk about having a history of not just their bourbon, but master distillers going back generations. And you find out that there's a lawsuit from the late 50s that has the entire origin story of Ezra Brooks, and it's a brand created out of thin air in 1957. So there is no true history to Ezra Brooks, despite what the labels say. So that's been another interesting point that I've learned here is there is a lot of puffing and in the marketing that goes on with bourbon labels. And I think what people are finally latching on to is that honesty is important and truth is important, and people don't want to feel duped by marketers.
So
and
I guess
as you say, there's
go for it. Keep going.
Go ahead. Well, just there's so many bourbons out there, and every bourbon says it's distilled by its own distillery. I mean, even with Buffalo Trace, if you look at Elmer T. Lee, it's distilled by the Elmer T. Lee distillery. Well, that's just on paper, and that's fine. That's sort of one level of labels that I think can be misleading, but that's fine because it's an assumed name of Buffalo Trace. That's fine. But then you get other labels that I don't think they go a few steps further than that, let's say.
Yeah, that's a kind of good way to put it, right? So I guess you brought up
people are getting tired of that.
Yeah, and I totally agree, because we've talked about I think there's one great distillery out there, and everybody kind of knows Four Roses. They're very transparent in a lot of the stuff that they do by putting recipes out there and warehouses and labels, and I think that's what more or less people are starting to really look for as educated consumers.
I think that's right. And that's, you nailed the perfect example there, particularly with the single barrel that tells you the warehouse. And if you know how to decipher the numbers at the very bottom label on a single barrel bottle, you know which directional side of the warehouse it's in, and you know which rick it's on and how deep in the row it is. I mean, it's great transparency.
Now, if I remember correctly, you have something on your blog that kind of talks about all that, right?
I do. I confirmed with Four Roses and then published how to read the single barrel label. So that's on there. So
there you go. So everybody, if you really want to know your stuff in Four Roses, go ahead and start studying up on that. So back to the Ezra Brooks thing. You had another article on your blog called Copycat Whiskey, and how there was sort of a thing with Jack Daniels. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, the whole reason that Ezra Brooks even came along in 1957 because they wanted to copy the success of Jack Daniels. So there was a guy named Frank Silverman who started sourcing whiskey, and he had it bottled at the Hoffman Distillery, which in the 90s gained a lot of fame because that's where Julian Van Winkle bottled the first sourced Pappy Van Winkle. It's in Lawrenceburg. And so in 1957, Frank Silverman launched a brand new brand with sourced whiskey. He had it in a square bottle. He had it with a black and white wraparound label. It was 90 proof, just like Jack Daniels. So the bottle looked the same. The proof was the same. They had similar pictures on the label of an old small town distillery. They used kitschy country language. Jack Daniels at the time said rare old Sipp'n whiskey, and Ezra Brooks said real Sipp'n whiskey. Both were charcoal filtered, so both said that on the label. They both had the same sort of white neck piece higher on the neck of the bottle, and they both advertised that it was in short supply, which is, we're coming full circle again today with a lot of distilleries saying that they're short in supply. But there was a short supply of Jack Daniels in 1957, and Frank Silverman wanted to take advantage of that. So he came out with something that looked practically identical to Jack Daniels. And he got sued by Brown-Forman, which had just bought Jack Daniels, and of course didn't take too kindly to a new upstart trying to take its business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty funny because, yeah, you kind of talked about that, and you also talked about in your article about how when Brown-Forman actually bought Jack Daniel's, there was an influx in some capital, and they ended up having a 900% increase in sales.
Right, that's
like from the 1950s.
Yeah, it was just phenomenal. I mean, that's when Jack Daniel's as a brand really took off, and it might be the first modern day example of what marketing can do to a brand. And then we had a really long dry spell of no one really duplicating that. And now with the bourbon boom that's really took off, I think historically we'll look back probably to Brown-Forman opening Woodford Reserve in '96 as probably the starting time for this. But really within the last 10 years it's really taken off. And we've got the same sort of marketing efforts now that Brown-Forman undertook in the late 50s to really launch Jack Daniel's as a national and international brand.
So I guess there's a few names that always come up, right, when I look at your blog, and it's always like Taylor, Pepper, and sometimes you see KDA everywhere. So I guess who do you think is the most profound name in the legal world of with bourbon that you constantly run across?
It's definitely Colonel Taylor. He has, out of the cases that I've found, he has by far the most cases. I've written on probably 3 or 4 of them, and some also involve Pepper, who was really, in a lot of senses, his protege. But between the two of them especially, they have by far the most lawsuits. You end up seeing a lot of names that are still around today. Colonel Taylor was partners with George T. Stagg for quite some time at the OFC and Carlisle distilleries, and they had their lawsuits. And Colonel Taylor was also a huge proponent, thankfully, for the Bottle and Bond Act. He got that pushed through with the help of a politician whose last name, incidentally, was Carlisle. And the second distillery that Colonel Taylor and George Stagg opened up was called the Carlisle Distillery. But so you have a lot of litigation with Colonel Taylor, but you also have, I think, what can be characterized as the right reasons for his litigation, because he was suing rectifiers like Marion Taylor in Louisville. And he was also suing other rectifiers, and he was really pushing for protections for straight bourbon whiskey.
So I guess let's dig a little bit further into that. So talk a little bit about what he did in regards to the Bottle and Bond Act and why that was such a thing to kind of push through. If there's any sort of like real history that you just can't find on a label that says it has to be made in a certain warehouse and all this other kind of stuff.
Sure, he was the proponent for the Bottle and Bond Act, and it's 1897 was when it was finally passed. And I think a lot of people by now are learning essentially what it means, and it essentially means that it's had all been distilled in a single seasons, which at a single distillery. It's going to be at least 4 years old, and it's 100 proof. And they've tinkered with what the legal definition of bottled and bond means over time, and it was mostly deregulated in the 1980s with a big regulation clause. But it's still essentially a guarantee of what's in the, not a guarantee of quality. I've had some bond bourbons that I wouldn't call quality. It's a guarantee of what's in the bottle. And that Colonel Taylor was going after in the 1800s. He wanted to know what was in the bottle, and he accomplished that.
Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point-of-sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. Shopify's point-of-sale is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. And with Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns, from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. And get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone. Transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's point-of-sale Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/bourbon, all lowercase, and go to shopify.com/bourbon to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/bourbon. If you're anything like me, then you can't get enough about bourbon. And that's why I'm a subscriber to Bourbon Plus magazine. Bourbon Plus is a quarterly publication that tells the stories from the heart of bourbon, the farmers who grow the grain, the distillers who labor over the process, and the people like you and me who raise their glasses to celebrate it all. Subscribe to Bourbon Plus magazine today at bourbonplus.com, that's PLUS.com, and use code PURSUIT at checkout for $5 off your subscription.
So let's talk a little bit about the lawsuit with Stagg, because those are two pretty prominent names that everybody kind of knows that maybe they don't know the history behind it, but they know that when they see even a bottle of Stagg Jr. on the shelves, or during the rush of October when they see the George T sitting out there. Now, kind of talk about the history between Stagg and Colonel Taylor and what that really meant for their brands, and how they broke apart and all that sort of stuff.
Well, Colonel Taylor, in his business life, really experienced a roller coaster ride. He was also a politician. He was mayor of Frankfurt, and he started life as a banker. And so he really came into the business with a lot of connections and with a lot of know-how about financing. And he had worked with some distilleries, and I understand got the bug. And so he bought the distillery that's now Buffalo Trace. And as part of his roller coaster ride through the bourbon industry, he went broke a couple of times. And George Stagg became the owner of the OFC in 1877, I believe it was. And that's around the time that Colonel Taylor was trying to form other partnerships, so he became a partner in something called Gainsberry and Company. And that's a company that actually owned the Oscar Pepper distillery for a little while. And it's the company that eventually acquired the Old Crow brand and built their own distillery on Glens Creek, just downriver from the Oscar Pepper distillery. But back to Stagg and Taylor, they seemingly got along for a couple of decades after Stagg bailed him out. And the lawsuits that I've read show that Stagg was the majority owner of the new company that was still called E.H. Taylor Jr. Distillery. And Taylor was just a 1% owner of it, but he was definitely the face of the company. There was no George T. Stagg brand at the time. That's something that's a lot more recent. So the brand that they produced was the E.H. Taylor Jr. brand. And they used the script signature that's still used today. And that's in this time frame, that's what guaranteed what's in the bottle. There were not as many trademark protections as there are now. And it was really the signature that could show you what you've got in the bottle. And that's why they used it.
So you actually have another article about Colonel Taylor's signature. So is there something more to that? That's the origin of it?
Well, the more to that story actually involves Stagg too, because after they broke apart, they decided to part ways, and it was not necessarily an agreeable parting, but it wasn't litigious either. And as part of the deal, Taylor got the J.S. Taylor Distillery, which was run by one of his sons, which has now become the Old Taylor Distillery that Marianne Barnes is renovating and will be distilling it by the end of the year. And by the way, I loved your interview of Marianne. She's great, and I'm glad you had her on the podcast.
Yeah, top-notch gal. She's really good.
It's fantastic. So when they parted ways, when Taylor and Stagg parted ways, Stagg was investing more money into the OFC and the Carlisle and actually had to shut down for 18 months. And that gave Taylor a head start. He had stock at the J.S. Taylor distillery already, and so he continued to produce the Old Taylor brand with his name on it. Once Stagg got up and running after 18 months had gone by, he too started bottling bourbon called E.H. Taylor Jr. Bourbon, and that used the same script. And that's when they got into their lawsuit, because Stagg was using the same name that they had produced while Taylor was a 1% or 1 share owner of the Carlisle and the OFC. And Taylor ended up winning that lawsuit because the only thing that Stagg had trademarked as owner of the company was the names OFC and the Carlisle.
Man, I tell you what, there's Taylor just got himself in too much shit the way that sounds, right?
Oh, he did. I mean, some of it he found himself, some of it he tripped into, some of it he went out of his way to get into, but he loved lawsuits.
I was about to say, and there's even another one. You've got another article called "Kentucky Wasn't Big Enough for Two Colonel Taylors," and so so talk about that one a little bit too.
Sure, a lot of people in Louisville will know the name Marion Taylor. We've got the Marion E. Taylor building downtown. People sometimes have heard on Whiskey Row of the Wright and Taylor company, and they were mostly rectifiers. However, they ended up owning the Old Charter brand, and they ended up owning a distillery, and they ended up being able to produce true straight bourbon whiskey. But for a long time, they were rectifiers. And Marion Taylor was also a colonel, so you've got two Colonel Taylors, and they locked horns because Marion Taylor was selling a rectified bourbon called Old Taylor at the same time that Colonel Taylor in Frankfurt was selling his Old Taylor brand. And this was really a preview to the Bottled and Bond Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act that came in later in 1906. And it was more of Colonel E.H. Taylor's efforts to really gut every rectifier he could find. I mean, if he had one goal in life other than making fantastic straight bourbon whiskey, it was to protect what he was making. And you got to admire him for that. And so he would go after any rectifier, but particularly one that was using the same name he was using. And again, this is a time period when there weren't really trademark protections, and you really had to find different ways to go about it. And E.H. Taylor's way to go about it was to be able to distinguish between straight bourbon whiskey and what he called imitation whiskey. And that's what he did in the lawsuit against Marion Taylor. And he won. And after he won, I've got a couple of images on that post. He took out full-page ads in the Wine and Spirits Journal to basically tout his victory and to trash Marion Taylor.
Well, I guess that's one way to do it, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, and it was the main journal of the time for spirits, and he was definitely taking a victory lap when he started taking out full-page ads. But he never let go. It's like the pit bull who just clamps down and doesn't let go.
I mean, did you see a lot of things in regards of, I don't want to say copyright or brand infringements or something like that being a big kind of, I guess you can say, sticking point in a lot of these cases?
Well, it definitely was a big sticking point in these cases, and it's really one reason that I like researching this area of the law, because American law really grew up because of the bourbon industry. If you look back to how trademark law developed in the United States, all of the cases pretty much deal with bourbon. You've got, for example, I've got a post on a Churchill Downs distillery case.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Churchill Downs Distilling versus Churchill Downs Incorporated.
That's right. So you've got a guy in Nelson County who starts a distillery, and he calls it Churchill Downs Distillery. And so he gets sued by the Churchill Downs that we all know. And he was clearly trying to use the name Churchill Downs to sell bourbon. And otherwise, he was just a brand new distiller with no track record, and maybe so or maybe not actual decent bourbon to begin with. But he was using their name, and he had a P.O. box in Louisville, and so that let him on his label put Louisville on his label, even though he was in Nelson County. And so at the time, trademark law would only protect a trade name in the same line of business that you were operating in. So he argued that he doesn't have anything to do with thoroughbred racing, so he can use the name Churchill Downs however he wants. And this was a case that extended trade name protection broader than the area where you already did business. So it's a real significant case in the development of American law.
So how did how did that one actually end up? I'm assuming
that ends
it's
up
not around anymore.
Yeah, right, it's not around anymore, and it wasn't around after that case because Churchill Downs, the thoroughbred racetrack, won the case. And he had to change his name, and there's no record as to what he changed his name to, or whether he became a successful distiller with a different name. The case just sort of ends, and that's all we can ever know about it as far as the lawsuit history goes. But that name is gone, and the law got extended from what it used to be.
Yeah, even if
you see that all over with other bourbon cases.
Yeah, I was about to say, it'd be really hard to throw some guesses at it considering it's from Nelson County, so I can't even think of any more names or brands that would be around there.
Right. Yeah, but there would definitely have been a few during that time frame.
Yeah. So I guess the name Stitzel-Weller always kinds of comes up, and that's the everybody can throw the name Stitzel-Weller and everybody goes crazy over it. Is there any kind of history or cases that involved them?
I didn't find any at all involving Stitzel-Weller, and I was really surprised about that. I found some history about it, so we've got some lawsuits that mention it more in passing than anything else, as far as Stitzel and Weller combining forces and moving out of downtown to Shively. But there's none of the interesting cases that we have, like with the H. Taylor or James Pepper or Churchill Downs or anything else. They seem to have either gone unnoticed as far as litigation goes or stayed above the fray.
Yeah, I guess there are some happy marriages then in the bourbon world.
Absolutely, and there's quite a few brands that don't show up. I mean, there's really nothing in the litigation in any lawsuits that I've found about Four Roses either, or really Heaven Hill. But you've got some repeat players.
Now, would you say that a lot of these are from, I guess from fairly old? I mean, are there any things that's relatively recent in regards to laws and cases for anything that's really happening? I know we all kind of hear some of the stuff in the news that there's a few different labels out there that then put handmade, and it's really not handmade, and it all comes from this factory in Indiana. But anything else that kind of like strikes your interest? Anything that's relatively recent?
Yeah, probably the most recent case was about 10 years ago, and it was Woodford Reserve versus Barton, 1792. And I actually just published a post on that case. And it takes us back to 2003, which is when 1792 launched. And originally it wasn't called Ridgemont Reserve, it was called Ridgewood Reserve. And they got sued by Brown-Forman because of the bottle shape and because of the label design and because of the name, if you can believe it. I don't know that I buy this part of it, but Ridgewood sounded too much like Woodford, I guess just reversed. And that case only lasted about 6 months, which is insanely fast in my world. Mm-hmm. But Woodford ended up winning. And that's why the name became, and they've dropped the name now it's just 1792, but that's why the name became Ridgemont Reserve instead of Ridgewood Reserve. The result of that case isn't necessarily, to me, the important part of the case, though. What was really exciting for me to read in this case was the marketing angle that Barton Brands was taking as far as launching a new premium brand. They had made Very Old Barton for a while, and that was a 6-year-old bourbon, and they wanted to release an 8-year-old bourbon, and they wanted to call it super premium. And the marketers realized they needed a story to go along with that. So they, overnight, they named their still the legendary Ridgewood Still. Ridgewood, remember, is a name that they just picked out of thin air. But they made this marketing story that they had this legendary still that had been churning out fantastic bourbon for decades and decades and decades. And they wanted to tie it to their distillery and to their still. So that's why they called it Ridgewood Reserve. And the Brown-Forman was also able to find documents from the marketers that showed that they were trying to make everything look like Woodford Reserve. They wanted the Woodford feel is what they had in their own documents. So they came in, they saw the success that Brown-Forman had with Woodford Reserve since 96. And they wanted to duplicate that, and they wanted to tie it to their own distillery. So they made up this name. And I thought that was fascinating.
Brian, I'll tell you
and
what, if there is ever a time that they would get into like a bourbon trivia game, I definitely want to be on your team because I don't want to go against you.
It's fun. I tell you, I've learned so much. And I like knowing this, and I like being able to call BS when I need to. On the other hand, I don't want to get too far into it. Sometimes I just want to enjoy my bourbon.
Yeah, I'm surprised that a bunch of distillers haven't reached out to you already and asked you to come in and be a tour guide on the weekends for some extra cash or something like that.
Well, if I get bourbon with that, I might do it too.
There you go. You heard it first. So, I'm not going to grill you anymore on your history and all this other kind of stuff. A lot of things you also do on the blog are reviews of bourbon. So we're reaching the top of the hour. So just give me like your favorite, 2 or 3 that you've reviewed and lately to kind of give everybody kind of a taste of what you think are some of the best ones out there.
Well, sure. I try to run the gamut. I've had some bottom shelf reviews, and I've tried to go to the top of the shelf. And one of my most recent reviews was of a 22-year-old wheated Willet, and it was fantastic. The problem is that Willet's charging a lot of money now for anything that you can buy in the gift shop.
Yeah, for anybody that doesn't know, that 22 year is a $315 retail. But the one thing you do get out of it is it's a barrel-proof bourbon. It's a barrel-proof bourbon, so it's high 130s, and another one I had was low 140s, and it's fantastic. And for the first time ever in a bourbon, I tasted Tootsie Roll. A lot of times you get cocoa or dark chocolate or something like that, but this was Tootsie Roll, and it was so fantastic. But I really struggle with what's happened in pricing. So I don't know that I want to get into a habit of that sort of high end bourbons. When the market's hot, you gotta strike it, right? So
true enough.
They're definitely doing it,
and I sure don't blame them for that. But as far as favorites and everyday drinkers go, I love Elmer T. Lee, and that's just always fantastic. And I'm sad that we hardly can't find it anymore. But like my office bourbon, the Four Roses Single Barrel, that's probably my go-to, and that's the bourbon that I'll serve when people come over. I love it. I love it neat. And the other nice thing about it is people who want cocktails, the Four Roses Single Barrel really, really shines through with its rye and with its fruitiness. And so it goes great in cocktails.
That's fantastic. Well, like I said, we went back and forth on Twitter. I've got a few of those 22C barrels as well, and we got to get together and see if we can really put a head-to-head competition against all these. Because honestly, I tried the C16 and the C18 together, and I couldn't even tell a difference. So,
oh wow,
yeah,
okay.
Maybe that's just me and my immature palate, but I don't taste Tootsie Rolls. I taste bourbon when I drink bourbon, so it's hard for me to like be creative and like the stuff that I taste when I'm actually drinking it and stuff. I'm just like, oh yeah, this one's good. This one's all right. That's the kind of way I kind of go about it. So, but good deal. So Brian,
looks like bourbon when you ask the color, smells like bourbon.
I know exactly. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you or they want to read more about what you do, where can they find you?
I've got a Google blog, so it's sippincorn.blogspot. So that's where you can find all of my posts. And I'm on Twitter at sippincorn, SIPPNCORN.
Yep, and I will put all those links in the show notes. So, Brian, thank you very much for being on the show today. I can guarantee, at least in my opinion, this is one of the better shows that we've done because there's so much knowledge that came out of this that everybody's going to become a lot more educated now when they understand a lot of the history. And, hopefully, we can have you on again. Maybe if you can dig some more things out of Lexis Nexis or whatever it is that you find all this stuff out of, and we can talk about some more of the history that's happening in this world.
I'd love to do it. Thanks for having me.
Great. So if you if you like our show, please go ahead and you can find us on iTunes. You can also like us on Facebook. You can follow us at Twitter. Hell, if you actually want to go ahead and write a review on iTunes about our show, that'd be awesome. We've got almost 15,000 plays, but nobody's even written a review about us yet. So go ahead and write us a review. We'd love to see some reviews out there. If you want to suggest some people to have on the show, if you like what you hear, please send us a message, theduo@bourbonpursuit.com. Looking forward to the next show, and we'll see you later.